Test 1 2 1 2.
We're gonna do a short, close the home trip since it's not on.
Let me get you framed up for you, so hang on one second. Let me get you framed up.
Hello, thank you all for being here. Let's go ahead and get started. I do have a full 45 minutes worth of information, and I want to make sure I get you where you need to be after the presentation. I'm Dr. Sandra Dalton Smith. I'm an internal medicine physician. I've been in practice for the past 20 years, and over the past 4 to 5 years, I've been doing a lot of research on burnout, specifically burnout as it relates to the healthcare environment. I wish I could say that that came about because I was just that curious, but it came about because I burned out myself and had to figure out a way to stay in this profession without losing my mind. Can anybody relate? So I'm in the right room, so good. What I want us to begin to do is to really start think about not just, oftentimes when we're looking at healthcare burnout, we're looking at how it relates to patient outcomes and patient care. And I get that is important, obviously. But we also have to look at the result of how it affects us personally as individuals, our families, our lifestyles, our relationships with our spouses and with our kids, and our own personal health. So as we're going through this discussion, I want you to first off think about where you're at in the burnout process. Are you already experiencing it? I often say people come to our burnout talk either because they're self-aware enough to know that they're at risk, or they have that friend that they are trying to get information for, right? We all have that friend. So whichever reason brought you in, have a moment where you're doing some self-analysis. There's going to be a couple of quick assessments. You have the handouts in front of you to make it very easy. I realize you're eating as well. So if you don't have time to do the assessments as we're going throughout them, take a moment to do them yourself once you complete this time together. This is one of my favorite quotes, particularly in a healthcare setting, because as those who are most familiar with the body, we also are the ones who's most likely to disrespect it when it comes to burnout. Burnout is what happens when we try to avoid being human for too long. When we start thinking that the things that we're telling our patients don't necessarily apply to us. That some way that we can not take time to rest, not take time to wind down, not address our own emotional, social, sensory, spiritual, creative outlets that are needed. For most of us, what we're needing is to look at not work-life balance, because that is the lie that has gotten us in so much trouble. You cannot put your work on one side of the scale and your life on the other side and expect to have any type of reasonable outcome. They're at odds with each other. That's how a scale works. You're trying to keep them balanced. What we're looking for really is work-life integration, where they are harmonizing together in a way that they can both be going on at the same time and not have either of them become toxic. So you're wanting to get to that state where you're enjoying the process of being in healthcare again, where you're enjoying your relationships with those that are in the healthcare setting as well as those in your personal life. And you're getting back to that place of feeling like your life has purpose. Dr. Jack Gropel from the Johnson & Johnson Human Performance Institute states this, and I think it's a very important place to start, is how resilience affects our ability to manage stress and change. If anything is constant in healthcare, it's change. Things are constantly changing, whether that's the people you're working with or the administration or the insurance companies. Change is really the only thing that is consistent. And so having a system in place on how you can be more resilient helps you be able to manage that change and not break under the stress of it. Dr. Gropel says this, the key is to recognize that you will never eliminate stress from your life. Instead, create regular opportunities for the body to recover from stress. Just as you would rest your muscles before weightlifting repetitions, stress is the stimulus for growth, and recovery is when the growth occurs. That's how we build the resilience muscle. Now, you may not have even ever thought about how resilient am I? But your level of resilience will determine how quickly you are able to adapt to changes within your workplace, as well as changes just when dealing with different people personalities. In healthcare, that is another constant change. You have one patient that you're working with who's all smiles and thankful, and another who's cursing you out because their eggs are cold. So you're needing to find that balance in working with these different personalities, and that requires resilience. Now, when looking at resilience, it's helpful to have some idea of where you personally are at on the resilience scale. So this is one of those assessment times I was mentioning to you. This is on the handouts, but I want you to quickly just think about these. And on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being you don't feel like this statement agrees or mentions you, suggests who you are, or 5 being that you feel like this statement strongly reflects who you are. 1, I'm usually optimistic. I see difficulties as temporary and expect to overcome them. Number 2, feelings of anger, loss, and discouragement don't last long. Number 3, I can tolerate high levels of ambiguity and uncertainty about situations. 4, I adapt quickly to new developments. I'm curious, I ask questions. 5, I'm playful. I find humor in rough situations and I can laugh at myself. 6, I learn valuable lessons from my experiences and from the experiences of others. 7, I'm good at solving problems. I'm good at making things work. 8, I'm strong and durable. I hold up well during tough times. And 9, I've converted misfortune into good luck and found benefit in bad experiences. Now, when you complete that assessment, you'll add up all of your scores to get a number. And that number is your level of resistance. The goal is to have a resilience score of somewhere between 30 to 35. That resilience score in that adequate range means that you're someone who would be able to quickly adapt to change without it causing unnecessarily excess stress on your life. However, when you do that assessment, if you score less than that, particularly if you score in the 20s or below, you're at high risk for burnout because any changes that occur, and as we mentioned, the healthcare atmosphere is constantly changing, is keeping you under a level of stress that is not just going to affect your ability to do efficient work, but also your ability to have a good personal life as well. So it's not just professionally, it's personally. Building up the resilience in the workplace is going to require you to start looking at where do you need to actually start building this muscle up more. When Dr. Gropel, when he mentions this, he talks about when you're exercising, you have those moments when you're going to take a break in between the repetitions. Well, if your schedule is such that you're working every 5-6 days a week, where are those breaks going to come? And that's where we're going to transition to, is to start looking at what exactly does it look like to have a stress management plan in the healthcare field. Because you can't go take a vacation every time you feel burned out. That's just not realistic. Some jobs may be able to do that. Healthcare doesn't work that way. So there has to be a system in place for ongoing, continual restoration in those areas where you're feeling depleted. And so we're going to look at really a strategy for how you're going to do that. That's not going to require you to take a vacation, because last time you took a vacation, I can guarantee you one of two things happened. You found some moments of rest, and then you found a lot of time to do fun stuff you never have time to do when you're at home. So you left the vacation more exhausted than how you entered into it. And so I always say vacations are a great place to go have fun and hang out, but they are not a burnout strategy. Unless you're being very intentional about that vacation being all about restoration. Because recovery is really about restoring those places of your life that you are consistently depleting. And when we look at these different areas, what we're going to be looking at is we're going to be looking at you personally in your area of healthcare. Where are you having to pour out more of your resources? Some places it could be physical, depending on if your job requires you to physically be very involved. Some is very mental. Some is very emotional and social. And so not restoring those specific areas will keep you in a level of burnout that will make you think that your fatigue is related to lack of sleep. And so many people have gotten the misunderstanding that sleep and rest are the same thing. So when they're tired, they think, okay, I just need to get more sleep. Now, granted, many of you probably are sleep deprived, and that's probably a part of it. But what happens when you go to sleep and you wake up 8 hours later and you're still feeling exhausted? When that occurs, the issue is not simply a sleep deficit, it is a rest deficit. And that's the mind shift change that has to happen for most people to be able to develop a burnout prevention strategy that works. Because most of us have strategies that don't work. And when that happens, we get to the point of either one or two things happen. Professionally, we have a fall, or personally, we have a fall. Or we have both happening at the same time, which is what I see in many hospital settings when I show up. We're seeing the fallout of it, and we have yet to come up with a strategy that doesn't take us away from the work that we love. And let me stop there just for a second. There's a recent study that came out with Deloitte that stated 87% of people have no passion for their jobs anymore. Now that may work if you're like in insurance or something where you don't really have to talk to anybody or be involved. That doesn't work in healthcare because people know when you are disconnected from the caring part of healthcare. They recognize it. And it comes out in patient scores. It comes out in evaluations. It comes out in how well they feel they have been taken care of. And so I always consider talks like this with a healthcare community, it is your administration investing in you. Because they understand that to get the most efficient, highest quality work out of you, they need you to be at your most efficient. And they need you to be full in these areas to do your best work. The past 4 years that I mentioned have been spent in research and writing and all sorts of stuff. And all of that had accumulated into these 7 types of rest that we're going to go through and talk about. We're going to look at what it looks like to be deficient in any of the 7. And we're going to look at how do we get back what we're pouring out in these 7 areas. This is the same talk that I was recently asked to give as part of the Centers of Disease Control Wellness Speaker Series, because to have them say, our staff is so burned out, we can't be as efficient as we need to be to hold the responsibility we have, I think says a lot for the need for burnout prevention, because it's the same thing applies to every one of us. Regardless of whether your role is in that you're in the direct patient care or indirect patient care, it all comes down to the patient sensing whether or not they've been cared for well, whether they're getting the end result that we desire. So those 7 types of rest are mental, spiritual, emotional, social, sensory, creative, and physical. And we're going to start off with the physical rest deficit because this is one where most of you have some idea when you're experiencing more of this because you're having to physically do things to undo it. So if you have a physical rest deficit, some of the things you may experience would be 2 to 5 o'clock rolls around, all of a sudden you're looking for the nearest Starbucks or anybody with any kind of caffeine because you need a jolt. Or you're looking for some type of sugary snack to jolt you back awake. You're having body aches and pains. You're doing things that are requiring you to use your body, whether that's sitting or standing, but you're using your body in ways that it's getting tight and tense. And so by the end of the day, when you hop into your car, all of a sudden everything hurts and you're not comfortable anymore. Or you're finding that you're getting significantly less sleep than you know that you need. Averages, I throw out the window. Everybody has their own amount of sleep that makes them feel their best. If you know you're getting less than that, then you're more likely getting a physical rest deficit. And some of the very simple things that you can do for the physical rest strategy, particularly if you're in a situation, let's say if you're sitting for long periods of time, if that happens to be your role, you're at a desk, is to start practicing something called body fluidity. and flow break cycles. The research with flow break cycles puts it around 90 minutes to about 2 hours of getting up from that seated position to keep moving. You know, we call sedentary lifestyle the new smoking, because that seems to be where more people are getting more illness and that they're not doing enough movement. So these flow break cycles are an easy way to incorporate that within your day. If your job requires you to do a lot of standing for long periods, you may not be thinking about that as being a physical activity. I mean, you're not at the gym, you're not on the treadmill, you're not out doing something where you feel like you have to stretch afterwards. But if you're a surgeon over a table, over a patient for 3 hours, something's going to hurt by the time that's over. What harm would it do to take a few minutes to stretch after that? We don't think about that. But then we find later on we're having more and more body aches and pain when there are some very simple things just being mindful and aware of can allow you to be able to relieve some of that unnecessary stress and tension on the body. The amount of water that you're drinking. Water is a big way of helping everything, the lymphatics and circulatory system, work properly. And so if you're avoiding getting water, as many do, because you don't want to have to take a bathroom break because your patients are lined up 15 minutes apart, so you avoid the water, and then in that whole process there's further stressing out the system. So some very simple things to add back into the process. Now, many of you may know this person. This is the person who comes to work every day with that huge cup of coffee we were talking about. They never miss it. They come in, you know they're there because they either come in groaning and complaining, or they come in hot, ready to bark down and bark at anybody who gets in their way because they're ticked off where they even got through the door. They are easily irritated, very agitated. For the most part, it seems like they're going through their day just to get a paycheck. You don't know why they went into medicine, because it's very obvious they're not happy to be here anymore. And this is the person that we want to try to turn some things around for. This person has a mental rest deficit as one of the 3 that they're dealing with. When you have this problem, one of the main things that you will find is that when you try to lay down at night, your head will be nonstop. It's like you can't get your brain to just shut up already so you can go to sleep. You're having these ongoing conversations about ways you wish you'd said something different to a patient or a colleague. You're thinking about all the different stuff that you have to do the next day. You're going through that list in your head. You may actually be having times when you feel as if you have dementia. You're like, why can't I remember anything? I walked into this room, and why am I standing here now? Because I can't recall why I walked in here. It may seem like new information, new techniques, new things you're being asked to do seem excessively difficult because you can't seem to grasp it as quick as, let's say, maybe some of your younger counterparts. And so you feel like something is going very wrong, but all the tests come back negative. This is when you start looking at what else is going on. And in this case, it's a mental rest deficit. Now, how do you undo this? The problem is so often we are, particularly in what I call high achievers, which the room is full of right now. People who have gone above and beyond, who have said, I'm going to be on the front lines of healthcare. I'm going to deal with people's pain. I'm going to deal with people's agony. I'm going to deal with their hurt. So you put yourself kind of a little bit, a step above the amount of stress that normal people get. The statistics show that healthcare workers experience burnout up to 70% of us. And so you have to recognize the risk, because you won't even attempt to fix it if you don't first do the self-analysis to recognize it. So once you recognize that you are one of those people who you're having the mind conversation about, wow, I really wish I had said that different. That didn't come out the way I had hoped it'd come out. But think about this. It's the middle of the night. You're supposed to be sleeping. So trying to piece together your list for the next day or rethink those conversations in that moment is not beneficial. I'm not sure what that is.
Oh, don't stress over it.
Don't stress. I like that answer. So, do we need to do anything? Are we good to proceed? Good to proceed. Okay. I want to make sure. So, regardless of, let me get back where I was at. So, regardless of why your mind is actively going on and on, you're going to want to take some time to write that down. Now, when I say that, some of you are like, I'm not a journaler. I'm not a journaler. That actually would stress me out to have to write a journal. But if you can't let it go here, having something concrete that you can let it go on will help your mind release it. So when you're thinking of something like, let's get real basic. You've got kids in school, and you've got to remember to put pajamas on somebody for pajama day so they're not the only one that showed up with no pajamas. So really basic stuff we're talking here. Write it down. Don't try to sit there and keep that stuff in your head, because all it's going to do is keep you from going to sleep. So if you write it down, now your brain doesn't have to try to hold on to this bit of information, which really in the big scheme of things is not going to be life-threatening if they showed up in regular clothes, but it's important to you, so you're holding on to it unnecessarily. We have to get to that point where we understand that mind dumping may be a very simple strategy. Having just a Post-it note that you can write that down on before you go to bed at night. Another one is making sure that when you feel that your headspace is full, you're allowing yourself some open room to be able to process information. Let me just break it very, very basic in the healthcare profession, particularly for those who are care providers. If you have a bad situation that happens with a patient, you know, oftentimes we don't go back and discuss that with our colleagues because there's a little bit of, you know, maybe, you know, we're not talking the lawsuit type of blame. I mean, one of those things where it's like, oh, I wish I'd just done this thing or looked at this thing or evaluated this thing. But that little bit of self-doubt if you did all you could do. And I think that's very real for providers, because there's always sometimes this thought of, could I have done just one thing more? When it gets to that, what I tell my physicians to do and nurse practitioners to do, write down whatever that area was that you felt like, I wish I had known a little bit more to be able to research that. And then when you're in a better headspace, research it. But don't sit there and condemn yourself, because that's not going to change what the outcome already was. At that point, you need to be able to release it, get some sleep, get some rest, so that at a later date, yeah, if that's an area you need to do some more research in, you can do it and do it effectively without having that extra baggage on you. This particular person also is in need of creative rest. Now, this is one of the types of rest that most people have never heard of. They don't even know exist, but they already are experiencing times when they're benefiting from it and don't know why. How many of you just love going to the beach or bodies of water or the lake or anything like that? Because when you're there, you're like, I just feel better, and I can't even explain to anybody why I feel better. My husband likes to go fishing, comes back with nothing, and I'm like, that was a horrible fishing trip. Nothing happened there. And he's all smiles because he got the chance to be at the water. So those of you who have that experience of creative rest from being around bodies of water, actually some of the most recent research reflects that there are actual chemical releases that they're noticing when they're doing the MRIs for people that are looking at, let's say, regular grass versus looking at water. The ones who actually get that type of creative rest, there's actually a change. Your endorphins are released in that setting. Now, the issue with that is most of us don't see creative rest as beneficial, so we don't actively pursue it. Now, if you don't live near the ocean, that may seem difficult. But what about the creative rest that comes from something as simple as putting a work of art in your office space? For many people, they're working in spaces that have very bland walls with nothing on them, and so they walk into these bland walled buildings and they're wanting to know why are there no creativity, no innovative thoughts, no thinking outside of the box, no expansion in that realm. And it's because you're not actually pouring back into the place where you're using it. And in healthcare, you are creatively using your innovative processes, because every person that walks through that you're treating is different. You're having to think outside the box all the time. So creatively, you are using these resources from yourself, and unless you're specific, you may not be restoring it back. And that's when we lose passion. That's when we lose joy. That's when we no longer feel connected to the work, because we no longer feel any excitement from it. So some of the simple things can be adding beauty to your setting. And that beauty can be reflective of you personally, not what somebody else may enjoy. I have people who have drawings from their grandkids that look like scratch. I mean, looks like absolutely nothing of worth to me, but they are like getting awe and inspiration from it because it's from someone they love. Some people get it from something as simple as if you love art or theater or music. There may be a symphony that's coming to town and you're like, okay, let me get last minute tickets because I happen to not be on call that day, so I'm going to be able to go and actually enjoy it. You have to put some significance on restoring that creative part of you if you want to stay passionate about the work that you do. The next one is sensory rest. Now, sensory rest gets touchy because often now with healthcare, most of our work, or a lot of our work, I should say, is done on the computer. So I always say it's kind of 50% patient time, 50% computer time is what it feels like in the primary care setting. You're talking to the patient and you're typing on the computer. So you're spending so much time on these electronics that we're not aware of how the electronics are affecting us and how all the noise and the gadgets and the sounds, how all of that is affecting us. One thing I want you to start thinking about is, what is your immediate response when your phone or your pager goes off? If you're someone who has to be attached to your phone or pager for work reasons, your response is likely not a healthy one. It is an immediate stress response because you are gearing yourself up for whatever's about to go down with that page. And so when that happens, even when the page is, when you know you're off, when you're not at work, you're not on call, you're not attached to it, but you've got it because your wife or your son or your husband or whoever may call you, you're still having that same stress response. Something very simple to do is to change the tone so that you can detach from the response that's become more toxic. And actually, the recommendation is to consistently change the tone so that you don't become accustomed to any of them feeling toxic. When you have the same tone for years, and every time that comes on, it means you've got to run to the emergency room, then when your family's calling just to say hi or sending a text just to say they love you, you're still having that stress response because that's what you've gotten conditioned to. You want to remove some of that negative conditioning to allow yourself to not have that response. And then on top of that is to be aware that you don't have to answer calls when you're not on call. It is healthy to not be attached to your electronics all the time. But if you're someone with kids at home, to make a point of having a no phone zone at the table. That includes when you're eating out. What I find is often within healthcare professions, there is a feeling of being disconnected from kids, especially if they're in that age where they really don't know if they want to talk to you right now or not. So they're in that teen in-between age, and they're all about their phones and their friends and their gadgets, and they sit down at the table, and it's already hard enough to have conversations with them. And now they're on the phone at the table, which is the one time you actually get a chance to maybe sit with them. Make it a no phone zone. And one of the key things that this helps also with is with the current social rest deficit that is oftentimes at place in families, where we have family members who are living in a house together, but they never spend any face-to-face time together. We'll go more into social rest as we proceed on, but just briefly here, so a lot of the research when we look at this shows that we are breeding a generation of people with our teens on up who are very comfortable not looking anybody in the eye, because most of their time and the conversations are not face-to-face. So if you walk into a high school, you'll see people, they're walking, even if they don't have a phone, they're just looking down. They're not looking anybody in the eye anymore. And the problem with that is, we keep talking about this potential healthcare shortage that we may have with primary care physicians in the coming years. Well, that shortage is going to get even worse if we have a generation of people who have no ability to connect with other humans. How is that going to help? So part of that training occurs in the home with how to be face-to-face, eye-to-eye, and real with our emotions. So a sensory rest strategy can include turning off those electronics. Most phones and almost all computers now have a setting where you can put that at 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock, you pick the time, where the screen light, the amount of brightness on the screen, goes down. And that's a great way to start conditioning yourself to wind down. It takes some of the brightness of the screens down. Also being aware that in your home, every light doesn't need to be on all the way till 10:30 or 11 o'clock when you go to bed. Start actually downgrading some of the sensory input before you go to sleep. It includes making sure that you're actually spending some time in silence. If your whole day has been spent in noise here at the hospital, then the drive home probably doesn't need to be filled with talk radio about the politics. You probably need to wind down a little bit before you walk into your house and unload all of that stress onto your family, and to use that as an opportunity to allow yourself to wind down, and to make sure that the room that you're sleeping in actually is cool and dark. You're more likely to get a deeper level of sleep in those situations. Now, this is another person that I see often. This is the person who everyone thinks is the absolute nicest person they've ever met. It's the one that you turn to and you ask to do a favor, because you know even if they don't want to do it, they will give you a reluctant yes rather than a truthful no. They have little to no personal boundaries. They let people walk all over them. And so these people are well liked, but their people-pleasing tendencies gets them in a lot of emotional and social trouble. Because what happens is it opens them up to feel unappreciated and to feel used. And so we don't want this to be anyone's situation, because that's when someone says, well, I've been with this company for 20 years, but I'm leaving because they don't appreciate me. They just keep working me to the bone. But we have to kind of take a look at what's feeding that. What has been the relationship as far as personal boundaries, so that someone knows what is acceptable to you and what is not acceptable to you. Let's start with emotional rest. An emotional rest deficit comes in when we have that feeling of failure and not like you're not being successful and growing to the level that you'd like. A lot of that people-pleasing type behavior. And I say that as far as people-pleasing because for the most part, it's going against what you actually want to do. You're doing something for someone else to like you rather than just being authentic and real in the relationship. Now, this occurs more in our personal and private relationships. If you're already overworked and overstressed in your professional life, and then someone from the school calls and say, well, you're the only parent who hasn't volunteered in the whatever. Wouldn't you like to help us out on Saturday? Now, your personal boundaries may say, absolutely not. I'm bone tired. This is the first day I haven't been on call. I'm going to sleep. That's what you want to say. But out your mouth comes, sure. That's when we have a problem. Because I guarantee you, your kid probably could care less if you volunteer. And there's probably plenty of people who would love to volunteer who don't have maybe as much stress going on and have space for that. But you then taking those couple of hours that you're finally getting to relax to then do something that you really have no heart for and no passion for. Now, if what she's asking you to do is something you truly have a passion for, that's a whole different ballpark. Because then it aligns with your priorities, it aligns with your purpose and your mission and your goal. But if it's something like, for instance, I was asked one time, do I want to make help my son's science class make a volcano? No. Ask me to teach you the bones or something. Let's at least make it medical so I feel like we're in my zone. I don't know anything about volcanoes and I don't do paper mache. So we've got a problem. That's going to require me 3 hours of figuring out just how to put the mold together. No. Personal boundaries let you quickly see what's a yes and what's a no, so that you can then have a healthy emotional rest strategy. You want to spend time doing those things you actually love. You want your activities to line up with your priorities. And that's a place for a lot of us to start, is to get real about really what are my priorities. What's number 1, what's number 2, what's number 3? Because some things are good and they are beneficial. There's a lot of great causes out there, but not all of those great causes align with your personal priorities. And so you have to and priorities change. If you have small kids, your priorities will be completely different than you have kids that are grown-ups with their own families. So being able to look at that and make the necessary adjustments. And the last part here about practicing authenticity gets a little tricky in the healthcare setting, because there is a level of inauthenticity that goes in being professional. Some of you may be what I call jokesters. You're the kind of person who you like having fun and telling jokes and hanging out and all of that stuff, but you can't do that with patients, right, most of the time, because the nature of the relationship is different. And so recognize that that level of inauthenticity that sometimes comes with being a professional is a stressor. It is a stressor not to be yourself. And so recognize that. And then on the flip side of that, realize that there has to be times when you feel able to truly be who you are. And so if you are that person who likes to do jokes and pull pranks and all of that, of course you're not going to do that in the ER, right? That's not going to go over too well for anybody. But when are the times that you are able to be yourself? When are you allowing yourself to just be fully authentic? And to make some room for that and some space for that in your life. Now, spiritual rest gets very tricky because there are lots of different religions and lots of different perspectives on that. So I don't go into a lot of specifics. Rather than to say this, there needs to be some recognition of it, as well as being able to think of some ways that you can feel that part of you, particularly if it's an important part of you, that you're allowing yourself room for that. Whether that could be prayer, meditation, regardless of religions, I think all of them believe in those two, as well as community and a feeling of connectedness and belonging, and making sure that you're allowing yourself room for that. Some people can do it as simple as having what I call life-giving or affirming messages. Having maybe something in your office that reminds you that you're part of something bigger than just your individual life. Social rest, we touched on some. Social rest goes back to those relationships that we have. And so when I say social rest, some people automatically think I'm talking about, do you mean I need to get off Facebook and Instagram? No, that's kind of more sensory type stuff. But honestly, Facebook and Instagram and all the different social media platforms have put a stress on our social rest, because what happens is it's put us in the middle of everybody's life to an intensity that is not normal. I shouldn't know if you're having a pumpkin latte or a vanilla latte today. I don't really need that bit of information about you. But if I happen to be on my feet at that time, now I'm all engrossed in, I wonder what a pumpkin latte tastes like. And so I've got all this other stuff going on in my head when it's not necessary. And so what you're wanting to do is to make sure that your amount of social expenditure and energy that you're putting out, that you allow yourself to be restored in that area as well. So with social rest, one of the first things to think about is, how do things affect you? Do they affect you negatively in that they feel exhausting and draining, particularly certain people and certain relationships? Or do they make you feel energized? Do they give you life and make you feel alive? Because how those relationships affect you then affects what else you need to happen for you to feel like socially you're in a good place. If all of your relationships are negative, draining, pulling relationships, which almost all of the ones you'll have in a hospital setting, people are needing something from you. They need your compassion, they need your mental capacity, they need your skill, they need your talents. That's why they're here. They're here to get something from you. And so when you recognize that, then who is filling me back up? Now, who's filling you back up could be a colleague who gets you, who understands that some days this job sucks, some days this job's great. And so you can have those conversations and just be truthful with each other. This one is not a good day. I would rather be doing anything than doing medicine. And then you have those other days where you're like, I couldn't think of anything else but doing medicine. It goes back and forth, and oftentimes that wavering is whether or not you've been filled back up in one of these capacities, that you've gotten back to a place of kind of ground zero in that mindset. Now, the negative and the positive is not always patience. Because if you think about it, your relationship with your kids, for the most part, is a pulling relationship. It is not a bad thing. Your kids need you. That's how that relationship is put together. At times, your spouse may be more pulling than giving, but you have to recognize that. And so when you feel like the nature of the relationship is more pulling, who are the people that are going to be life-giving? And it doesn't have to be a large number of people, but it needs to be someone. One of the biggest barriers to this is that many adults don't have real adult friends. They have lots of acquaintances, lots of people they hang out with on a regular day that they see in transaction, but they don't really have what we call true friends. That's what I call those people that are with you till the end. And the reason being is because we have put all of our attention over on these relationships that need us. And we have downgraded the importance of those relationships that uplift us. And so my challenge to you today is, if there is someone that when you get around, you physically feel better. You cannot quantify it. This is not a scientific thing. It is an emotional feeling. It's what I call the power of presence. There are some people that when you are around, you can't even explain it, but you feel better by being around them. That person is one of your life givers. That's the kind of person who makes you feel more energized, who makes you feel better. Now, they may be someone who's affirming. They may be someone who, what we call, speak your love language. They say the things you need to hear without you even asking them to say it. But those are the people that you want to find some time to connect with. And that connection does not have to be, okay, let me figure out how to have a coffee date or a dinner date or a beer date or whatever it is with this person. It could be something as simple as, that's my person there. Let me see if maybe we can happen to grab lunch at the same time and sit together and have a 5-minute talk while we're all woofing it down before we go to our next patient. Or if you're like me, my life-giving friends, one's in California, the other one's in Canada, and I'm on the East Coast, so we physically can't be together hardly at all. Once a month, we actually do a Skype time. Because the thing is this, it's not just about phone calls and text. Because phone call and text take out the power of presence. You don't get to see someone's mannerisms. You don't get to see them eye to eye, face to face, so to speak. See how their bodies move. All of that stuff that goes into really feeling how someone is perceiving you and how you perceive them. So things like the What's-It app, Skype, Zoom, FaceTime, all of those are ways to get higher quality social rest. And so that could be as simple as, and that's why the military does it now. Why is the military doing FaceTime instead of the phone? Because those guys are over there sometimes forever. Guys and gals are over there forever. And they need to be able to come home to their kids and their kids not feel like they're strangers. Have you ever met someone that you know on social media, and you may have been social media friends forever, and then you meet them and they still feel like a stranger? Because you don't have presence with them. The presence is actually what makes someone feel familiar. And so once you're actually doing that on a regular basis with your life givers, you start restoring back this area of social rest. Now, beating burnout, the very first thing I always have people start with is looking at which of those 7 you're most in need of. Out of those 7, there will be one that will stand out above all others. And even as I was describing them to you, you may have automatically been like, oh, okay, she's reading my mail right there. That's me all day. And so if whichever one that was, that is the one you focus on first. Because that is the one that is most likely affecting your ability to be your best, to be your most effective, your most passionate, your most centered. And unless you address that one first, getting all the others, you'll still feel tired. You'll still feel drained. Because getting rest in one area won't fix rest that's needed in another deficit. That's why sleep won't fix a social or emotional rest. You have to address the specific one that actually is causing you problem. And some of the very basic things have to do with just those personal boundaries. Getting rid of the people-pleasing type behavior, and then learning how to use the word no effectively. So that if there is something you're asked to do and you know that this is not the time, that your priorities are not aligning with whatever that activity is, to take back control of your own no and to use it. There are a couple of free resources that are available to you. One of them is restquiz.com. It's the free personal rest assessment. This is it is a very comprehensive type quiz that allows you to determine which of the 7 types of rest you're most efficient in. It gives you actually a score. This is where, that quiz is actually where the CDC and Dr. Oz and Psychology Today, that's where they found me. Because over 59,000 now, I think, have actually found their rest deficit using that resource. Because the thing is, you have to first do the self-analysis. You first have to diagnose what the problem is before you can ever treat it. And so that's that key. And then the 30-day Sacred Rest Challenge has to do with walking it out. Because once you identify, okay, I have, as some people tell me, okay, I need all 7, and I scored high in all 7. Well, one's going to be the highest, start with that one first, but we all need all 7. We're using all 7 of those areas every single day, some just more than others. And so the Sacred Rest Challenge walks you through a 30-day simple plan. Again, this is another free resource to help you be able to see, how do I apply this in real life? What are very simple things I can do day to day without taking a vacation, without taking time off work, without adding more stuff to my to-do list? How do I live a lifestyle of rest and restoration to help prevent burnout without having to do a lot of excess stuff? So that's what that's for. I'll stop now and allow some time for questions if there are any. Did anyone have any questions or comments? One of the most common questions I get asked has to do with, okay, so what would you say to someone who right now already feels like they are burned out? They're already there. You know, they've got the resignation letter just about written up. They're trying to figure out any other job other than healthcare they can do and keep the bills paid. What is the one thing I would have them start to do is to go back to why you fell in love with the profession in the first place. What is it that made you want to go into healthcare? I understand all the changes. Like I said, 20 years in internal medicine, where I did what we call traditional internal medicine, where I'm in the hospital at 7 in the morning till 9 seeing my patients, in my office till 5, back at the hospital from 5 to 6 seeing whoever the ER sent in. If I'm on call, you know, playing with the pager all night long, answering calls, all over again. I get it. I get it. I've been there. That's what I do. I get it. But for me, to recover from burnout, it had to go back to the beginning. Why is it that I wanted to do this? Because let's be honest, there's a whole lot of other ways to make money than medicine, so that wasn't it. The whole purpose was to help people. And I can't help them if I feel like I'm drowning myself. And so being able to recognize when you're going under is one of the first steps of being able to get back on top so that you're able to live really at your highest capacity. All right, thank you for your time.